Snow came down that morning the way memories do. Soft at first, then heavy enough to quiet a whole town. Briars and wore winter like an old wound. Every roof bent beneath it. Every street narrowed to a single path of trampled white. The general store stood at the center, its windows fogged from breath and coal heat, its bell tired from too many years of announcing hunger and hope in the same sound. Maribel Holt stood near the counter with her gloves folded in her hands, though they offered little warmth anymore. The leather had thinned where her fingers rubbed together too often, as if trying to make heat out of patience alone. She set her coins down one by one, each clink measured, deliberate. Pennies mostly. A nickel she had saved for days. The loaf of bread sat between her and Mrs. Calder Finch like a judgment rendered before trial. Outside, a gust rattled the glass. Inside, no one spoke. Maribel counted again, slower this time, as if the numbers might change if treated kindly. Her lips moved without sound. When she reached the end, her hand remained still, hovering over the wood, unwilling to accept what it already knew. Mrs. Finch leaned forward, eyes sharp, mouth pinched as though the cold had finally found a way inside her. "That won't be enough," she said, not unkindly, but without mercy either. "Prices are up. Flour's dear this winter." Maribel nodded. She had expected this. Expectation, she had learned, was easier to carry than surprise. "I can come back tomorrow," she said. Her voice did not tremble, though it wanted to. Mrs. Finch sighed and pushed the coins back across the counter with 2 fingers. "Tomorrow doesn't make bread cheaper," she replied, loud enough for the room to hear. "And charity makes habits." A murmur passed through the store, quiet as mice in the walls. A man shifted his weight. Someone coughed. No one met Maribel's eyes. She gathered her coins, the metal already cold, and slipped them into her pocket, as if hiding something shameful. The loaf remained where it was, golden and unreachable. When she turned, her reflection in the glass showed a woman thinner than she remembered, shoulders drawn inward, as though apologizing for the space she occupied. Near the shelves of grain and salt stood Elias Crowthorne. He had been there long enough that the floorboards knew his boots. A tall man, broad without heaviness, his coat dusted white at the shoulders, where snow had settled and refused to melt. His beard carried threads of gray, and his eyes held the kind of quiet that came from listening more than speaking. He had watched the counting, the second counting, the way Maribel's fingers paused, just barely, before collecting the coins. He saw the way her chin lifted when Mrs. Finch spoke, not in defiance, but in restraint. It was the posture of someone who had learned that dignity could be preserved only if guarded carefully. Elias did not move. He did not step forward. He did not speak her name, though he knew it. The town was small. Knowing was unavoidable. Instead, he stood still, hands at his sides, as if any motion might turn the moment into something louder than it needed to be. Maribel pushed open the door. Cold rushed in, sharp and eager, filling the room before she slipped back into it. The bell rang once, thin and final. Outside, the wind met her without ceremony. Snow found its way down her collar, stinging her skin awake. She pulled her shawl tighter and began the walk home, boots sinking into the churned path that cut between buildings like a scar. Each step carried her farther from warmth and closer to the truth she had been avoiding. Her cabin waited at the edge of town, where the road gave up and the land remembered itself. It was small, built for hands that had once been 2 instead of 1. The door creaked when she opened it, as if protesting the cold she let in. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old smoke. The stove sat dark and empty, its belly cold to the touch. Maribel set her shawl aside and moved through the space with practiced efficiency. She checked the shelves, though she already knew what she would find. A jar with the last inch of beans. A sack with more air than flour. The coffee tin held nothing but grounds clinging stubbornly to the edges, ghosts of mornings long gone. She sat on the narrow bed and pressed her palms together, willing warmth back into them. Hunger was not loud, it was patient. It waited behind her ribs, reminding her of itself with each breath. Once, this cabin had sounded different. There had been laughter, the scrape of chairs, a second set of boots by the door. That life felt borrowed now, like a story told by someone else. She did not let herself dwell on it. Memory could be as dangerous as the cold if indulged too freely. She rose and filled a kettle with snow, setting it on the stove despite knowing there was no fire to heat it. The motion itself was a kind of defiance. She would keep moving. She would endure. Winter did not get to decide everything. Across town, Elias unhitched his horse with slow, deliberate movements. The sky had darkened, clouds pressing low, heavy with the promise of more snow. He brushed his hand along the animal's neck, murmuring a sound that was not quite words. Inside his house, the shelves were full. Not rich, but steady. Enough to last. He removed his coat and hung it by the door, then stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet. In it, he heard things he usually kept buried. The memory of an empty table, of a winter when help had come too late. He did not think of Maribel's face directly. He thought of the space around her, the way the room had closed in when the loaf was taken away. By lantern light, he gathered what could be spared. A sack of flour, beans, dried apples, coffee. He wrapped them carefully, tying the bundle with twine that bit into his fingers. When he stepped back outside, the wind greeted him like an old adversary. Snow fell harder now, thickening the world, softening edges. His boots left deep impressions as he crossed town, each step an argument against the night. He did not approach her door directly. Instead, he circled, careful, placing the bundle just inside the shed where it would be found but not announced. He did not knock. He did not wait. Maribel woke before dawn, the cold having crept too close for sleep. The light outside was pale and uncertain, the world suspended between night and morning. She pulled on her boots and stepped out to fetch more snow, her breath catching when she saw the door to the shed ajar. Inside, the bundle waited. She did not touch it at first. Suspicion had been taught to her carefully, layered over years. But hunger was louder now, and curiosity, too. She knelt and loosened the twine, her hands shaking as the contents revealed themselves. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then she sat back on the cold ground, the snow seeping through her skirt, and pressed her hand to her mouth. The sound that escaped her was not quite a sob. It was something quieter, something that had been waiting a long time to be allowed out. There was no note, no name, only the evidence of care, deliberate and unannounced. She carried the supplies inside, setting them on the table as though afraid they might vanish if treated too casually. The stove roared to life soon after, heat spreading, cautious but real. As the room warmed, so did something in her chest, a space she had kept guarded since the world had taught her how quickly kindness could be withdrawn. By the time the town stirred, smoke rose from her chimney, for the first time in days. From the road, Elias passed her cabin without slowing, eyes forward, face unreadable. But as he went, he allowed himself one small glance, just enough to see the thin line of gray curling upward into the winter sky. Briar's End noticed. Towns always did. Whispers followed footsteps. Speculation bloomed in the cold. But between the cabin and the passing rider, something had already been set in motion, quiet, unseen, and unwilling to be undone. The snow kept falling, covering tracks, but not erasing them, not with violence, but with persistence. Days shortened, and the light thinned to something fragile, as if it might break if handled carelessly. Maribel moved through those days with a new steadiness, not because her troubles had vanished, but because someone had seen her and chosen silence over spectacle. The supplies lasted longer than she expected. Care always did, when measured honestly. Elias did not return to the cabin, not openly. Instead, small mercies appeared the way sunrise does, without announcement. A stack of firewood cut clean, and left where it could be found. A mended latch on the shed door, tightened against the wind. Each act was precise, restrained, as if he understood that help, to mean anything, must not ask to be thanked. Maribel answered in kind. One morning, Elias found his gloves folded neatly on his porch, the torn seam along the thumb stitched with careful hands. The thread was uneven in places, but strong. He turned the gloves over slowly, as though they carried weight beyond wool and leather. He did not smile. He did not need to. The town watched. Briar's End always did. Mrs. Calder Finch spoke first, her words sharp with curiosity disguised as concern. She remarked on smoke rising where it once had not, on firewood that seemed to move itself. She asked questions no one answered directly. Deputy Owen Hale shifted uncomfortably when the talk turned pointed, offering shrugs where courage might have lived. Maribel felt the weight of those glances when she walked into town. They followed her steps, measured her posture, waited for proof that kindness had softened her into something smaller. She refused them that satisfaction. She held herself as she always had, back straight, eyes forward, the dignity of survival stitched into every movement. Elias felt the pressure too, though he carried it differently. Men spoke to him in half-jests, warned him with smiles that did not reach their eyes. He listened and said little. Silence had always been his truest language. The storm came on a night without warning. The sky closed in early, clouds dropping low and heavy, the wind sharpening as if it had found a purpose. Snow fell thick and relentless, erasing paths, swallowing fences, pressing the world into something smaller and more dangerous. Maribel woke to the sound of cracking wood. The stove shuddered, then fell silent, its warmth retreating as quickly as it had arrived. She knelt to coax it back, fingers numb, breath shallow. The wind found every weakness in the cabin, slipping through seams and boards, laying claim to the space. She worked until her strength thinned, then sat back, chest tight, the room tilting just enough to warn her. Panic rose, swift and insistent, but she forced it down. She wrapped herself in blankets, conserving what little heat remained, listening to the storm make its argument against endurance. Across the white dark land, Elias stood at his window, watching the snow erase the road. He did not know how he knew, only that the unease settled into him with certainty. He saddled his horse without hesitation, hands moving from memory, and stepped into the night. The ride was brutal. Wind clawed at him, snow blinding, the world reduced to sound and instinct. When he reached the cabin, it stood half-buried, smoke absent, the door rattling in protest. He dismounted and forced it open, calling her name once, softly, as though volume might frighten her further. Maribel turned toward the sound, relief and fear colliding in her chest. He did not rush to her. He did not lift her, or carry her, or take control. Instead, he knelt beside the stove and worked, methodical and calm, rebuilding heat piece by piece. When the fire caught, he held the moment steady, allowing warmth to return on its own terms. They sat on the floor as the room slowly revived, their shoulders not touching, the space between them deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even. "You weren't invisible," he said, not as reassurance, but as fact. Maribel swallowed. She met his eyes then, really met them, and in that exchange, something settled. Not rescue, not debt, just recognition. Morning arrived muted and pale. The storm eased, leaving behind a world remade. Word traveled quickly, as it always did. This time, it carried weight. The town shifted, subtly, uncomfortably. Mrs. Finch looked away when Maribel passed. Deputy Hale nodded, something like respect finding its way into his posture. Maribel began baking with what she had left, bread that smelled like hope and patience. She sold it quietly, fairly. People came. They always did eventually. Elias helped when asked, and stepped back when not. The balance held. Spring would come, or it wouldn't. That was never the point. If you are still listening, still here with them in the quiet aftermath, remember this. The smallest kindness, offered without witness, can remake a winter. And if stories like this remind you of what the world can be at its best, stay with us. Subscribe, and walk these roads again.